The extraction shuttle arrived at exactly sunrise, as scheduled. But instead of finding the usual handful of exhausted survivors huddled around emergency beacons, the pilot found 23 cadets standing confidently on top of the absolute barrier, looking like they were ready to climb another 300 meters if necessary. "This is Extraction Team 7, the pilot reported back to the Academy. "I need to confirm my readings. Are there really 23 cadets on the summit?" Commander Velthar's crystalline form flickered through rapid color changes as he processed the unprecedented report. "Confirmed. 23 cadets successfully completed the test, sir. In 500 years of Academy records, the total number of cadets who have completed this test is 0. I am aware of the historical statistics, pilot. Begin extraction procedures." But as the shuttle prepared to land, something even more remarkable became apparent. Looking down the wall, they could see climbing teams at every level. The lights that had seemed like scattered stars the night before were revealed in daylight as organized groups of cadets, all using variations of the techniques that Tejo's team had developed and shared. "Sir," the pilot reported again, "I count at least 60 more cadets actively climbing. Should I wait for them?" "Negative. Standard extraction protocol applies. Cadets have until 800 hours to reach the summit, or they fail the test." But Tejo was studying the wall through his binoculars. The nearest team was only 30 meters below the summit. Using the rotation technique, they could reach the top in less than 10 minutes. "Request permission to assist ongoing climbers," he called to the shuttle. "Negative, cadet. You have completed the test. Board the shuttle immediately." Nari joined Tejo at the edge of the summit. "They are so close. It seems wrong to leave them." "Orders are orders," Vorth said, but his voice lacked conviction. Zixtal was using his multiple arms to manage climbing ropes. "Accidentally dropped rope over edge. Very clumsy of me." Corinne was already preparing her thermal equipment. "Such a shame if someone below found useful equipment just lying around." The shuttle pilot's voice became more insistent. "Cadets, board immediately or face disciplinary action." Tejo looked at his team, then at the climbing cadets below, then at the shuttle. Sometimes he realized the right choice was not the same as the legal choice. "Request denied," he called back to the shuttle. "We are assisting fellow cadets in completing the test." "Cadet, you are in direct violation of Academy protocol." "Yes, sir, we are." For the next 30 minutes, the summit team worked frantically to assist the climbers below. They dropped ropes, called out timing for the rotating ice, and provided guidance for the most difficult sections. When needed, they rappelled down to provide direct assistance. Team after team reached the summit. Some were mixed species groups that had formed during the climb. Others were traditional single-species teams that had learned cooperation techniques during the ascent. All of them had one thing in common. They had succeeded by working together instead of relying solely on individual abilities. By Aero 800 hours, the official end of the test, 47 cadets stood on the summit of the absolute barrier. Commander Velthar himself arrived in the command shuttle to assess the situation. His crystalline form cycled through colors that the cadets had never seen before, indicating emotional states that had no precedent in Academy history. "Cadet Tae-ho," the commander said, his voice creating harmonic resonances in the ice around them. "You have violated direct orders from Academy personnel." "Yes, sir." "You have disregarded 500 years of testing protocol." "Yes, sir." "You have fundamentally changed the nature of the survival examination from an individual test to a group exercise." "Yes, sir." The commander's crystals shifted to a deep blue that indicated deep thought. "Explain your reasoning." Tae-ho looked around at the 47 cadets from dozens of different species who stood on the summit. "Sir, the Academy teaches us that military success depends on cooperation between different species, each contributing their unique strengths to accomplish missions that no single species could handle alone. This test measured our ability to do exactly that. The test was designed to measure individual survival capabilities. With respect, sir, that is what the test measured when it was impossible to complete. But once we made it possible to complete, it became a test of leadership, cooperation, and tactical thinking under extreme conditions." Nari stepped forward. "Sir, every cadet who reached this summit had to learn techniques from other species, adapt them to their own abilities, and then teach their innovations to others. They demonstrated every leadership skill the Academy claims to value." Vorth added his perspective. "Vorth's people value individual strength above all. But on Wall, individual strength was not enough. Had to learn human thinking, alien flexibility, team coordination. Made Vorth better warrior." Commander Velthar spent several minutes in silent communication with Academy headquarters. His crystals flickered through rapid sequences of color as data and opinions flowed back and forth. Finally, he spoke. "The Academy Council has reached a decision. All 47 cadets who reach the summit will receive passing grades for the survival examination." Cheers erupted from the gathered cadets, but the commander was not finished. Furthermore, the examination protocols will be revised to incorporate the cooperative techniques demonstrated during this test. Future survival examinations will explicitly measure both individual capabilities and team coordination skills. He turned specifically to Tae-ho. "Cadet, your violation of direct orders would normally result in disciplinary action. However, the Academy Council has determined that your actions demonstrated the kind of initiative and tactical thinking that the military values above strict protocol adherence. No disciplinary action will be taken." As the extraction shuttles began ferrying cadets back to the Academy, Tae-ho took one last look at the absolute barrier. Already, Academy engineers were installing permanent equipment to support future climbing exercises. The impossible wall would become a training tool, teaching future generations of officers how to accomplish the impossible through cooperation. "What are you thinking about?" Nari asked. "My grandfather," Tae-ho said. "He always said that ice was just water that had forgotten how to move. I think the Academy was like that too, frozen in old ways of thinking. Sometimes it just takes the right kind of heat to make things flow again." 6 months later, Cadet Tae-ho graduated from the Galactic Military Academy with highest honors. His specialty was listed as interspecies tactical coordination, a field that had not existed before his test performance created the need for it. But more importantly, he graduated with 46 close friends from dozens of different species, all of whom had learned that the most powerful force in the galaxy was not superior strength or natural advantages, but the simple human belief that any problem could be solved if people were willing to work together and think differently about it. The absolute barrier still stood on Kithara 7, but it was no longer absolute. It had become a symbol of what was possible when different beings combined their strengths instead of competing with their weaknesses. And in the Academy's revised mission statement, prominently displayed in the main hall, was a new line that had been added after the climbing test. No challenge is impossible when beings of different worlds work as one. It was a lesson that a human had taught them, but it was a truth that belonged to everyone. The final 50 meters of the absolute barrier were unlike anything the climbers had faced before. The ice here was not just hard or smooth. It was alive with movement, constantly shifting as wind and temperature changes created stress fractures that opened and closed like breathing. "Dynamic ice," Tejo said, studying the patterns by the light of emergency flares. "It moves with the weather. That is why no one has ever reached the top. By the time you create handholds, the ice has shifted and they are gone." 5 teams hung from their anchor points, spread across the wall in a coordinated formation that would have been impossible without the cooperation techniques they had developed. Each team had specialized skills that contributed to the group effort. Team Alpha, led by Tejo, handled route planning and technique development. Team Beta, led by the crystalline being Chrysostel, used their natural thermal sensitivity to predict ice movements. Team Gamma, the Titan group led by Drex, provided heavy anchor systems and emergency support. Team Delta, a mixed group of agile species, scouted alternative routes. Team Echo, the insectoid team, used their natural sensors to detect safe paths. Through the shifting ice. Pattern analysis complete, Chrysostel reported. Ice shifts every 47 seconds. Window of stability lasts 12 seconds. 12 seconds, Nari calculated. Enough time to place one anchor and test it, maybe 2 if everything goes perfectly. Then we move in waves, Tejo decided. 1 team moves during each stability window. Others provide backup and safety. If someone gets caught in a shift, immediate rescue. Zixtal tested his 6-armed coordination against the timing. Possible, but no mistakes, no hesitation. The first wave began at midnight. Team Alpha moved during the stability window, with Tejo and Nari placing anchors while Vorth, Zixtal, and Corin managed safety systems. They gained 8 meters in their 12-second window before the ice began to shift again. Team Beta followed. In the next window, using their thermal sensitivity to find the most stable ice formations. They gained 6 meters and established a relay point for equipment. The technique worked, but it was exhaustingly slow. Each team could only move for 12 seconds out of every 47. The rest of the time was spent waiting, planning, and managing safety systems as the ice moved around them like a slow earthquake. At the 20-meter mark, disaster struck. Team Delta was caught in their stability window when the ice pattern suddenly changed. Instead of shifting gradually, a large section of the wall suddenly fractured, leaving 2 climbers hanging from anchor points, that were no longer connected to the main wall. "Emergency!" called Rax, the feline climber who Teho's team had rescued earlier. "Lost contact with wall! Anchors failing!" This was the moment when coordination proved more valuable than individual ability. While Team Delta's climbers hung from failing anchors, Team Alpha rappelled down to provide new anchor points. Team Beta used their thermal abilities to strengthen the remaining connections. Team Gamma prepared emergency safety nets 50 meters below. Most importantly, Team Echo used their sensory abilities to predict the next ice shift, giving the rescue teams exact timing for their work. 17 seconds until next shift, reported Bix, the insectoid team leader. "Move now, or wait for next window." Working together, they extracted both climbers and re-established their position on stable ice. The rescue took 3 stability windows, but no one was lost. "That is why we climb together," Vorth said as they regrouped. "Alone, those climbers would be dead." By 3 a.m., they had reached the 30-meter mark. The ice here was even more unstable, shifting every 30 seconds, with only 8-second windows of stability. But the teams had learned to work with machine-like precision. "Like a dance," Corin observed. "Each team knows exactly when to move, when to stop, when to help others." At the 40-meter mark, they encountered their final major obstacle. The ice here did not just shift horizontally, it moved vertically, with sections rising and falling like elevator platforms made of crystal. Traditional climbing was impossible because the handholds were constantly changing elevation. "New problem requires new solution," Teho said. "Ideas?" Christelle had been studying the vertical movements with her thermal sensors. "Pattern is predictable. Sections rise for 15 seconds, hold for 5 seconds, then descend for 15 seconds. "Ride the ice," Nari said suddenly. "Do not fight the movement. Use it." The solution was typically human in its creativity. Instead of trying to climb stable ice, they would climb moving ice. Each team would position themselves on a section that was rising, ride it to maximum height, then jump to the next rising section. It required perfect timing and absolute trust in their teammates. One miscalculation would send a climber plummeting down the wall, but it was also the fastest technique they had developed. "Synchronized jumping," Zixtal said. "6 arms give good accuracy for this." Team by team, they rode the moving ice toward the summit. The technique was spectacular to watch and terrifying to execute. Climbers would position themselves on rising platforms, time their jumps to land on other rising platforms, and gradually ascend the wall by surfing its natural movements. By 4 a.m., they could see the top of the wall. 50 feet above them, the ice ended and open sky began. But the final section was the most challenging yet. Here, the ice did not just move, it rotated, spinning slowly like a massive drill bit. "Rotation every 90 seconds, Bix reported. "Complete spin takes 5 minutes. "Jump timing?" Teho asked. "Possible," Christelle said after studying the pattern, "but must jump during exact moment when rotation brings stable surface into position. Miss the timing, and next chance is 5 minutes away." They had less than 2 hours until sunrise. Missed too many jumps, and they would run out of time. All teams, final coordination, Tejo called. We go together or not at all. The last 50 feet took everything they had learned. Teams had to time their movements not just with ice shifts and vertical motion, but also with the slow rotation of the summit section. It required the thermal sensing of Team Beta, the timing accuracy of Team Alpha, the strength of Team Gamma, the agility of Team Delta, and the precision of Team Echo. But most of all, it required trust. Trust that when one team called out timing, the others would move instantly. Trust that when someone needed help, others would provide it. Trust that they were stronger together than any of them could be alone. At 5:30 a.m., 30 minutes before sunrise, Tejo placed his hand on flat ground for the first time in 7 days. He was standing on top of the absolute barrier. Nari joined him seconds later, followed by Vorth, Zixtal, and Korin. Team Beta arrived 2 minutes later. Team Gamma, Delta, and Echo followed in the next rotation window. As the sun rose on the 8th day, 23 cadets from 12 different species stood on top of the wall that no one had climbed in 500 years. They had not just conquered the absolute barrier. They had proven that impossible was just another word for nobody has learned to work together properly yet. Below them, scattered up and down the wall, the lights of other climbing teams continued their own assaults on the impossible. The revolution was just beginning. Dawn on the final day brought an unprecedented sight. When Tejo's team looked down from their camp at 200 meters, they could see dozens of lights scattered across the face of the absolute barrier. What had seemed impossible just 3 days ago was now being attempted by teams throughout the remaining cadet groups. "Look at them," Nari said, pointing to a group of crystalline beings who had reached the 30-meter mark using their own version of the heating technique. They modified your design to work with their natural thermal properties. Below and to the left, a mixed team of different species had created an entirely new approach. They were using the stronger members to install permanent anchor points, while the more agile climbers scouted routes and placed safety equipment. "Learning," Vorth said with approval. "Good learning." But Tejo was studying the wall above them. The final 100 meters looked different from the rest. The ice here was newer, formed by different weather patterns. It would require different techniques. "Change of plan," he announced to his team. "I am going down." "What?" Zixtal's 6 arms stopped moving simultaneously. "Down? We are so close." "That is exactly why I need to go down. Look at those teams below us. They are making good progress, but they do not know what we learned in the crystal-hard section. They do not know about the overhang techniques. If they reach those obstacles without preparation, people will die." Nari understood immediately. "You want to teach them." "I want us all to reach the top, not just our team." Korin looked up at the final 100 meters, then down at the struggling teams below. "That is not how the test works. Individual achievement, individual success." "Says who?" Tejo asked. "The test is about survival and problem solving." "Well, the biggest problem is that good techniques are being wasted because only we know them." He started preparing his rappelling gear. "You 3 keep going. I will catch up. No, Vorth said firmly. Team climbs together. Team descends together. Team teaches together. It was a significant decision. They were sacrificing their chance to be the first team to summit in order to help others succeed. But as Tai-Ho had learned from his grandfather, some victories were more important than being first. The descent took 2 hours. Along the way, they stopped at every team they encountered, sharing techniques and solving problems. The crystalline beings learned how to regulate their natural thermal abilities for more efficient heating. A group of strong, bear-like aliens learned how to use their power more effectively by working in rotation rather than relying on individual strength. Most importantly, they taught the safety techniques that could prevent fatal falls. Why help us? Asked Drex, a leader of one of the Titan teams. We are competition. No, Tai-Ho said. The wall is competition. We are all just trying to beat the wall. By midday, the effect was remarkable. Instead of individual teams struggling with techniques they had invented on their own, the entire remaining cadet population was working with proven methods adapted to their specific abilities. A chain of cooperation formed up the wall. Teams that had mastered the lower sections began specializing in teaching those techniques to newcomers. Teams working on the middle sections shared advanced methods with each other. And Tai-Ho's team, now climbing back up for their second attempt, served as mobile troubleshooters for the most difficult problems. This is not normal, Zixtal observed as they passed the 100-meter mark for the second time that day. Cadets usually compete, not cooperate. Humans compete differently, Nari explained. Sometimes we compete to see who can help the most people succeed. At the 150-meter mark, they caught up with a team that was attempting the overhang section without proper preparation. One of the climbers, a feline alien named Rax, was hanging upside down from anchor points that were already beginning to fail. "Rope is slipping," Rax called down. "Cannot hold much longer." Without hesitation, Zixtal rappelled down to provide additional anchor points, while Corin used her thermal control to strengthen the existing handholds. Vorth prepared emergency safety systems, and Tai-Ho coached Rax through the proper technique for upside-down climbing. "Why risk your lives for stranger?" Rax asked once he was safe. "Because that is what teams do," Vorth said simply. By evening, something unprecedented was happening on the absolute barrier. Instead of individual failures scattered across the ice, there were coordinated teams working together at multiple levels. Knowledge flowed up and down the wall like water, with each team contributing their own innovations to the collective effort. Group of gas-based aliens had discovered how to use their natural state changes to test ice stability in ways no solid beings could match. Rock-like granite people had learned to use their natural density as mobile anchor points for other climbers. Even the insectoid species had found ways to contribute their unique sensory abilities to route finding and safety assessment. "Revolution," Corin said, looking up and down the wall at the unprecedented cooperation. "This changes everything." Tai-Ho was studying the final 50 meters above them. Night was falling on the 7th day, and time was running short. But now, instead of one team attempting the impossible summit, there were 5 teams within striking distance of the top. "Final push," he announced. "But not just us. All of us." The plan was audacious. Instead of racing to be first to the top, the 5 teams would coordinate their final assault. Each team would take responsibility for a different technical challenge in the summit approach. When one team solved a problem, they would immediately share the solution with the others. "Unprecedented," said Commander Velthar's voice over the emergency communicator. The crystalline officer had been monitoring the situation from orbit, and his crystal structure was cycling through colors so rapidly it looked like a rainbow. In 500 years of testing, no cooperation has ever been observed at this level. "Permission to proceed with coordinated summit attempt?" Tejo asked. There was a long pause. This was far outside normal testing protocol, but then again, nothing about this test had been normal since the humans started thinking differently about impossible problems. "Permission granted," the commander said finally. "All teams, you have until sunrise to reach the summit. Coordinated or individual, failure to reach the top by dawn will result in automatic test failure." As the last light faded from the sky, 5 mixed-species teams began their final assault on the summit of the absolute barrier. Below them, the lights of other climbing teams stretched down the wall like a constellation that had decided to climb toward the stars instead of hanging in the sky. Tomorrow, the Galactic Military Academy would either graduate the largest class of survivors in its history or witness the most spectacular coordinated failure ever recorded. But tonight, on the face of an impossible wall, aliens from dozens of different worlds were learning the most important lesson humans had to teach. That impossible was just another word for "no one has figured out how to work together properly yet." The sun had not yet risen when Tejo's team began their assault on the absolute barrier. In the gray pre-dawn light, 5 figures moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment one final time. Around them, the remaining alien cadets gathered to watch what many believed would be either the greatest success or the most spectacular failure in Academy history. "Remember," Tejo said quietly to his team, "we climb as one unit. No individual heroics. If someone needs help, we help. If someone needs to rest, we all rest. The wall does not care about species or natural abilities. It only cares about technique and teamwork." Nari tested her modified heating system one last time. The chemical mixture bubbled and steamed exactly as designed. "Ready!" Vorth shifted the massive pack on his shoulders. He carried enough supplies for all 5 climbers, plus emergency equipment that would have crushed a human. "Ready?" Zixtal flexed his 6 arms, each one holding a different piece of climbing gear. His modified tools gleamed with fresh metal polish. "Ready?" Corin checked the precision temperature controls she had built into her gear. Her natural thermal regulation would make their heat systems work 3 times more efficiently. "Ready." Tejo placed his claws against the ice and activated his heating system. The familiar hiss of hot chemicals meeting frozen water marked the beginning of the most important climb of his life. Then let us make history. The first 50 meters went exactly as planned. Tejo led, creating the initial path and primary handholds. Nari followed, improving each anchor point and setting up belay stations. Vorth came third, using his strength to install rest platforms and carry supplies. Zixtal managed the complex rope systems with his multiple arms, while Korin regulated the heat systems for maximum efficiency. By the time the sun was fully up, they had reached heights that individual climbers usually took all day to achieve. The watching aliens below had grown quiet, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. "They make it look easy," said one of the remaining cadets. "Not easy," corrected another. "Organized." At the 70-meter mark, they encountered their first serious obstacle. The ice here was different, formed during a period of extreme temperature fluctuation. It was harder than steel, and so clear it was difficult to judge depth and distance. "Regular techniques will not work here," Tejo said, hanging from his anchor point while he studied the problem. Korin moved up beside him, her flexible joints, allowing her to examine the ice from angles impossible for other species. "The crystal structure is different, more complex. Your heat mixture will not be hot enough." "Then we adapt," Nari said, consulting the notes she had been keeping throughout. "The climb. What if we use a two-stage process? Quick heat to soften, then sustained heat to maintain." Zixtal had been listening while managing the safety ropes. 6 arms can do two-stage work. Heat with one pair, tool work with second pair, safety with third pair. This was human thinking at its best, Tejo realized. Not accepting limitations, but finding ways around them through cooperation and creativity. They spent an hour developing the new technique. Korin would regulate the initial heat burst. Zixtal would follow with sustained heating while simultaneously placing anchors. Vorth would secure the safety systems. Nari and Tejo would test each handhold before the team committed to it. The technique worked. Slowly, methodically, they conquered the crystal-hard section that had defeated every previous attempt. At 100 meters, they reached the overhang that Tejo had spotted from the ground. Here, the wall curved inward for nearly 20 meters, creating a ceiling of ice that had to be climbed upside down. "This is where most serious attempts fail," Tejo said. "The ones who made it this far anyway." Looking up at the overhang, it was easy to see why. Climbing while hanging upside down required perfect technique and enormous strength. But more than that, it required someone to secure the safety systems from an impossible position. "Zixtal," Tejo said. "This section is yours." The 6-armed aliens studied the overhang carefully. His species could distribute their weight across multiple anchor points in ways that 2-armed beings never could. "Possible. But I need perfect handholds, no mistakes." "You will have them," Korin promised. Her temperature control could create handholds with precision no other species could match. For the next 3 hours, they worked their way across the overhang. Zixtal led, his 6 arms allowing him to maintain 3 points of contact while moving the 4th, 5th, and 6th. Korin followed, using her thermal abilities to create perfect anchor points exactly where Zixtal needed them. The others provided support, managing ropes and supplies from below. It was the most technically difficult climbing any of them had ever attempted. One mistake would send the entire team plummeting to the ice below. But human planning and alien abilities working together proved stronger than the barrier. When they reached the far side of the overhang at 120 meters, they allowed themselves 5 minutes to rest and eat. Below them, the watching. Cadets looked like tiny dots on the white ice. "We are actually doing this," Nari said, hardly believing it herself. "Halfway," Vorth corrected. "Still 180 meters to go." But the mood of the team had changed. They had conquered sections that were supposed to be impossible. They had adapted to challenges that no individual climber could handle, alone. They were not just climbing the absolute barrier anymore. They were proving that cooperation could overcome any obstacle. At 150 meters, they encountered their most dangerous moment yet. Tae-ho was leading a particularly difficult section when his heating system malfunctioned. The chemical mixture began burning too hot, creating steam that instantly froze around his equipment. Within seconds, his claws were encased in ice so thick he could not move them. Worse, the extreme temperature change cracked the ice around his anchor points. He was hanging from failing handholds with no way to create new ones. "Tae-ho!" Nari shouted. "Cannot reach him," Zixtal called. "Too far from last anchor point." This was the moment when individual species would be forced to watch their teammate fall. But this was not an individual effort. Corin activated her own heating system and began rappelling down from above on Zixtal's ropes. Her thermal control allowed her to free Tae-ho's equipment without damaging the remaining anchor points. Vorth, meanwhile, used his strength to drive emergency anchors into the ice below, creating a safety net in case the rescue failed. Working together, they extracted Tae-ho from what should have been a fatal situation. "New rule," Tae-ho said once. He was safe. "No one climbs alone from now on. We go up in pairs with full backup systems." The revised technique slowed their progress, but it made them unstoppable. When one climber encountered problems, their partner could provide immediate assistance. When both climbers faced difficulties, the team below could provide creative solutions. As the sun began to set on the 7th day, they reached the 200-meter mark. Above them, 100 meters of ice still gleamed in the fading light. But below them, something remarkable was happening. Other cadet teams had begun attempting the wall using modified versions of their techniques. The sound of heating systems hissing and metal claws biting into ice echoed from multiple points along the barrier. "They are following us," Zixtal observed. "Good," Tae-ho said. The test was never about one person reaching the top. It was about proving it could be done. As night fell, they prepared their final camp, carved into the wall at 200 meters above the ground. Tomorrow, they would either stand on top of the absolute barrier, or they would fall trying. But tonight, as they settled into their ice cave, they could see lights scattered up and down the wall below them. Other teams, other species, all attempting the impossible, using techniques that a human had taught them. The absolute barrier was finally being conquered, not by superior strength or natural advantages, but by the simple human belief that any problem could be solved if you were willing to work together and think differently about it. By the end of the 5th day, Tae-ho had climbed 15 meters up the absolute barrier. To the aliens watching from below, it seemed impossible. The human moved slowly, methodically, creating handholds where none had existed before. Each meter took nearly an hour of careful work. Heat the ice, insert the claw, wait for refreeze, test the hold. Move up. Repeat. When darkness came, Tae-ho was forced to create a sleeping platform carved directly into the wall. He used his heat system to hollow out a small cave just deep enough for one person. The aliens below could see his tiny light flickering against the ice like a star that had fallen sideways. "He is really doing it," Nari said, staring up at the impossible sight. 15 meters, Vorth said. Still 285 to go. But something had changed in the way the aliens talked about the climb. Instead of calling it impossible, they were starting to use words like difficult and slow. Instead of waiting for Tae-ho to fail, they were calculating how long it might take him to succeed. That night, something unprecedented happened. Instead of activating their emergency beacons, the remaining cadet group started experimenting with Tae-ho's techniques. A team of strong titans tried to make their own heat system using different chemicals. They managed to soften the ice enough to climb. 5 meters before their mixture ran out, 3 agile feline aliens attempted to use their natural claws with heated tips. They reached 8 meters before the modified claws broke under their weight. Even a group of crystalline beings who normally never attempted physical climbing spent hours studying the stress patterns Tae-ho's techniques created in the ice. "They are learning," Zixtal observed. "Learning what?" Vorth asked. "That impossible is just another word for has not been done yet." On the 6th day, Tae-ho began his climb at dawn. The aliens below had spent the night preparing. Nari had improved the heat mixture, making it last longer and burn hotter. Vorth had organized a supply system with ropes and pulleys to send materials up to Tae-ho as he climbed. Even Zixtal had contributed, using his 6 arms to braid stronger climbing ropes. 30 meters today, Tae-ho called down. Maybe 40 if the weather holds. But the weather did not hold. At the 20-meter mark, wind began hitting the wall with hurricane force. Ice crystals flew through the air like tiny knives. The temperature dropped so low that Tae-ho's breath froze before it left his mouth. Below, the aliens watched in horror as the tiny figure on the wall struggled against conditions that would kill most beings in minutes. "He has to come down," Nari said. "No one can survive that." But Tae-ho did not come down. Instead, he used his heat system to create a larger shelter, big enough for 2 people. Then he did something that shocked everyone watching. He repelled. "Down to the ground. I quit," Zixtal said immediately. "Human has given up. Smart choice." "No," Nari said, studying Tae-ho's face. "He has not given up. He has an idea." Tae-ho gathered the remaining aliens around him. Vorth, Zixtal, Nari, and representatives from the other surviving groups. His face was red from the cold, and his hands were bleeding from gripping the rough metal claws, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "I can climb this wall," he said, "but not fast enough. Not alone." "What do you mean?" asked Corin, a tall alien with blue skin and too many joints in her arms. The storm will last 2 days, maybe 3. I do not have enough supplies to wait it out on the wall. And even if I did, there are problems higher up that I cannot solve alone. He pointed up to where the wall seemed to curve slightly inward. See that overhang at 100 meters? I can create handholds, but I cannot carry enough rope to secure myself while I work upside down. So you need help, Vorth said. I need a team, people with different abilities working together. The aliens looked at each other uncertainly. This was not how the test was supposed to work. For 500 years, cadets had attempted the barrier, alone or in small groups, using only their species' natural advantages. Show us, Corin said finally. Tejo spent the next 4 hours teaching alien cadets how to modify their equipment and use human techniques. But he did not just copy his own methods, he adapted them. For Vorth, whose thick fingers could not do delicate work, Tejo showed how to use brute strength to carry heavy supplies and create rest platforms carved directly into the ice. For Zixtal, whose 6 arms gave him perfect balance, Tejo demonstrated how to manage multiple ropes and safety systems simultaneously. For Corin, whose extra joints allowed impossible flexibility, he taught advanced techniques for climbing overhangs and inverted sections. Your heat system, Corin said, studying the modified container. It works because you mix the chemicals at exactly the right temperature, yes? Yes. Too hot and it wastes energy. Too cold and it does not work at all. My people have precise temperature control. Natural ability. I can make your system work better. This was what Tejo had been hoping for. Not just copying human techniques, but improving them with alien abilities. By evening, they had created something that had never existed before in Academy history. A mixed-species climbing team using adapted human techniques enhanced by alien capabilities. Vorth could carry 3 times the supplies Tejo could manage alone. Zixtal could secure rope systems that were impossible for 2-armed beings. Corin could regulate the heat mixture with precision no human could match. And Nari, who understood Tejo's thinking better than anyone, could coordinate the team's efforts. We climb tomorrow, Tejo announced. In the storm? Zixtal asked. The storm will end tonight. I can feel it in the ice patterns. The aliens looked up at the howling wind and driving snow. None of them could feel what Tejo described. How do you know? Vorth asked. Because my grandfather taught me to read weather in ice. And because we do not have a choice. Tomorrow is our last day. Either we reach the top or we activate our emergency beacons. That night, as the storm raged around their shelter, the team made final preparations. They divided supplies, tested equipment, and went over the climbing plan step by step. "So, 100 meters!" Nari said, staring at their hand-drawn map of the wall. "In 1 day." "We start before dawn," Tejo said. "Climb fast in the easy sections, work together in the hard parts. No stopping except for safety." "And if someone falls?" Corin asked. "Then the rest of us keep climbing. One failure does not mean team failure." As predicted, The storm ended just before dawn on the 7th day. The wall stood clear and bright in the early sunlight, ice crystals sparkling like diamonds. 300 meters of impossible barrier waiting to be conquered, or waiting to claim 5 more failures, like it had claimed so many before. Dawn on the 5th day brought devastating news. Overnight, 30 more cadets had activated their emergency beacons. The sound of rescue ships coming and going had kept everyone awake. Now, less than 20 cadets remained at the base of the absolute barrier. Smart people, Vorth said, but his voice lacked conviction. His internal heating system was working so hard that steam rose from his thick skin. No shame in knowing when to quit? Tae-ho stood at the base of the wall, touching the ice with his bare hand. The cold bit his skin immediately, but he left, his hand there for several seconds before pulling it away. "Crazy human," Zixtal muttered. "Ice will take your fingers." But Tae-ho was not being crazy. He was learning. The ice was not just cold and hard. It had texture, temperature variations, stress patterns that his eyes could see but alien eyes missed. His grandfather had taught him that ice was like a book if you knew how to read it. "Look at this," he said to Nari, pointing to a section of the wall about 10 meters up. "See how the color changes slightly there?" Nari squinted. She could barely see what he was talking about. Maybe different density. The ice formed during a temperature change. It is weaker there. "Weaker is still stronger than anything we can break," she said. "We do not need to break it. We need to change it." While they talked, other groups were making their final attempts. A team of strong, bear-like ursoids tried to hammer climbing spikes into the ice. The spikes broke. The ice did not even crack. A group of insect aliens tried to use acid to eat handholds into the wall. The acid froze before it could work. Their emergency beacon started blinking 10 minutes later. 3 lizard-like saurians with natural climbing claws spent 2 hours trying to find any grip on the smooth surface. They managed to climb 3 meters before falling. One broke his arm. Their beacon activated as soon as they hit the ground. "See?" Zixtal said. "Impossible. Even species that climb naturally cannot do it." Tae-ho was watching, but not the failures. He was watching how the ice behaved. When the ursoids hit it with hammers, tiny vibrations spread through the crystal structure. When the acid touched it, small areas of surface changed texture before freezing. When the saurians pressed their claws against it, microscopic stress, patterns appeared. "The wall is not solid," he said. "What do you mean?" Nari asked. "It looks solid. It acts solid. But ice is just water that cannot move. If we can make the water move again, even for a few seconds—" Vorth had been listening. "You want to melt the wall?" "Not melt. Change. Temporarily." "With what? Our fire sticks will not work in this cold." Tae-ho pulled out the equipment he had been modifying for 3 days. To alien eyes, it looked like junk. Broken tools, twisted metal, containers that had been cut and reshaped. But Tae-ho saw something different. "Heat," he said, showing them a small container with a strange spout. "Controlled heat." "That will not work," Zixtal said. "Any heat will disappear instantly in this cold." "Normal heat, yes." But what if the heat comes from a chemical reaction that works better in cold? What if we can control exactly where the heat goes and how long it lasts? He demonstrated by mixing two substances from their emergency medical supplies. The mixture began to bubble and steam even in the freezing air. When he poured it into his modified container, it stayed hot. Emergency supplies, Nari realized. You are using emergency medical chemicals to make heat. And this, Tejo showed them twisted pieces of metal. For grip. The metal looked like claws, but wrong somehow, bent at strange angles with rough surfaces that hurt to touch. Those will not hold anything, Vorth said. Not as they are. But if I heat the ice just enough, just for a few seconds, and then these bite into the softened surface before it refreezes, Zixtal's black eyes went wide. You want to make your own handholds. Every few meters. Heat, grip, climb, heat, grip, climb. The aliens stared at him. Around them, the last few cadet groups were preparing to activate their emergency beacons. In 500 years, no one had even seriously attempted to climb more than 50 meters. Most did not try at all. It will not work, Vorth said. But he said it like he wanted to be wrong. Maybe, Tejo admitted. But I would rather fail trying something new than fail doing nothing. He started putting on his modified equipment. The metal claws strapped to his hands and feet. The heat container, attached to his belt with a long tube that could direct the hot mixture exactly where he needed it. Rope made from emergency cord and torn fabric. You will die, Zixtal said. If you fall from 50 meters, then do not let me fall, Tejo said. I need someone at the bottom to manage the rope. Someone to send up more heat mixture when I run out. Someone to tell the rescue ships where to find my body if this goes wrong. Nari started putting on her own climbing gear. I am going with you. No. If I fail, someone needs to be alive to activate the emergency beacon. This is not a suicide mission. Then I stay at the bottom, but I help. Vorth was quiet for a long time. Then he started gathering up the supplies Tejo would need. Vorth will help too. This is interesting problem. Even Zixtal, who had complained the most, began organizing the heat mixtures and testing the rope systems. Stupid plan, but first new plan in 500 years. As word spread that someone was actually going to attempt the climb, cadets from other groups came to watch. Most expected to see a spectacular failure. A few seemed genuinely curious about what the human was trying to do. Human tricks, one of them said, but not in a mean way. More like he was trying to understand. Tejo approached the wall and placed his modified claws against the ice. They scratched slightly but found no real grip. He activated his heat system and directed a thin stream of hot mixture at the ice, directly above his hand. For 3 seconds, the ice softened just enough. Tejo pressed his claw into the depression and felt it bite. The ice refroze around the metal, creating a solid anchor point. He was 1 meter off the ground. It works, Nari whispered. 1 meter works, Zixtal said. 299 meters to go. The third day brought new challenges. The temperature dropped to -60 degrees, and the wind started howling like an angry beast. Tae-ho watched his breath freeze in the air before it could reach his lungs. Even through his thick jacket, the cold felt like it was trying to crawl inside his bones. "This is nothing," Vorth said, but his voice sounded different, slower. "My people live in cold like this." Zixtal was having his own problems. His 6 arms moved like they were fighting. Thick mud. "Web glands. Freezing," he said through clicking teeth. "Cannot make tools." This was what Tae-ho had been watching for. The aliens were strong and naturally resistant to cold, but they were not flexible. When conditions changed beyond what their bodies expected, they started to struggle. Nari was shivering badly despite wearing every piece of clothing she had brought. "Tae-ho, I do not think I can keep going much longer." "Yes, you can," he said. "Trust me." While Vorth tried to use his internal heating system and Zixtal flexed his arms to keep them moving, Tae-ho started making changes to their camp setup. He showed Nari how to layer her clothes differently, trapping air between the layers instead of just piling them on. He made her eat small amounts of food more often to keep her body burning fuel for heat. "Human tricks," Vorth said, but he was watching carefully. That evening, they found other groups struggling even worse. A team of rock-like granite people had gone into emergency hibernation. Their bodies simply shut down when the temperature got too low. Their emergency beacons were already blinking. A group of gas-based nebulans were having the worst time. In the extreme cold, their gaseous forms were condensing into liquid. They looked like colored puddles on the ice, barely alive. One by one, their emergency beacons activated. "Smart to quit," Zixtal said, but his voice was uncertain now. His arms were moving so slowly that simple tasks took forever. Tae-ho did not say anything. He was too busy collecting things. Pieces of metal from abandoned equipment, organic waste that other teams had left behind, different types of ice and snow that formed in different wind patterns. "What is human doing?" Vorth asked Nari. "I have no idea," she admitted. "But he always has a plan." That night, Tae-ho worked by the light of a small fire while the others slept. He melted ice and let it refreeze. He tested how different materials behaved in the extreme cold. He took apart pieces of their standard equipment and studied how they were made. Vorth woke up and found Tae-ho still working. "You need sleep, human. Tomorrow will be harder." "Maybe," Tae-ho said. "But I think I figured out something important." "What?" "The aliens who designed this test, they think like aliens. They expect cadets to use their natural abilities to survive. But what if your natural abilities are not enough?" Vorth thought about this. His internal heating system was working harder than it ever had. On his home world, the cold never got this bad. "Then you die, or you adapt," Tae-ho said. "Humans are good at adapting." The 4th day brought them within sight of the absolute barrier. Tae-ho had seen pictures of it before, but seeing it in person was different. The wall rose straight up from the ground like it had been cut by a giant knife. The ice was so clear it looked like glass, so smooth that not even cracks marked its surface. Other groups were already gathering at the base of the wall. Most of the cadets were just staring up at it. Some were crying. A few were preparing to activate their emergency beacons. 500 years, Nari said. 500 years and no one has ever climbed it. Because they are trying to climb it like aliens, Tejo said. What does that mean? Zixtal asked. His arms were working better now that they had stopped for a while, but he still moved slowly. Look at them, Tejo pointed to the other groups. The strong ones are trying to use pure strength. The ones with claws are trying to dig into the ice. The ones with sticky feet are trying to walk up it like a wall. That is how you climb, Vorth said. That is how you climb normal things, Tejo corrected. But this is not normal. This wall was designed to be impossible for normal climbing, so we need to climb it in an impossible way. The aliens looked confused, but Nari was starting to understand. You have been planning this since the first day. Since before the first day, Tejo admitted. I studied every record of this test. I read about every attempt to climb the barrier. They all failed for the same reason. Which is? They tried to climb the wall as it is. Instead of making it into the wall they needed. That evening, more teams gave up. The sound of emergency beacons echoed across the ice like electronic birds calling for help. Out of 200 cadets, less than 50 remained. Tejo spent another night working on his mysterious project. By now, even the aliens were curious. Vorth tried to help, but his thick fingers could not do the delicate work. Zixtal offered his precision, but he did not understand what Tejo was trying to build. Human engineering is strange, Zixtal said. Everything looks broken. Sometimes broken things work better, Tejo replied. He was modifying their standard multi-tools, changing their shape with careful heating and cooling. To alien eyes, he was ruining perfectly good equipment. Nari helped where she could, mostly by keeping the fire going and melting ice in specific ways that Tejo requested. She was starting to see the pattern in what he was doing, even if she did not understand the science behind it. Are you really going to try to climb that thing? She asked. We are going to climb it, he said. All of us. Impossible, Vorth said, but he said it quietly. He had been watching the humans work, and he was starting to think that maybe humans knew something about impossible that aliens did not. As the sun set on the fourth day, Tejo looked up at the absolute barrier one more time. Tomorrow, he would either prove that humans could do the impossible, or he would become another failure in the Academy's records. But tonight, he had work to finish. The wall might be impossible to climb as it was, but Tejo was not planning to climb it as it was. He was planning to change it into something that could be climbed. The question was whether his alien teammates would trust him enough to try. The transport ship shook as it entered the atmosphere of Cathera 7. Tejo pressed his face against the small window and watched the white world grow larger below them. Ice covered everything. Mountains, valleys, even the air seemed frozen. First time seeing a deathworld human, The voice belonged to Zixtal, an alien with 6 arms and eyes like black marbles. His skin looked like metal, and when he moved, Tae-ho could hear small clicking sounds. Not exactly, Tae-ho said. He thought about the winters back on Earth, about ice fishing with his grandfather in Korea. But he did not say this. Most aliens thought humans were weak. The ship landed with a heavy thud. Through the speakers, Commander Velthar's voice echoed in the cargo bay. The commander was made of crystal that changed colors when he spoke. Right now, the crystals were bright red, which meant he was serious. Cadets, listen well. This is your final survival test. You have 7 days to cross the frozen wasteland and reach the extraction point beyond the absolute barrier. The absolute barrier is a wall of ice that stands 300 meters tall. No cadet has ever climbed it. Most do not even try. Tae-ho looked around the cargo bay. 200 alien cadets from 47 different worlds stood in neat rows. There were only 5 humans in the entire academy. The aliens came in all shapes and sizes. Some had fur, some had scales. Some looked like rocks with legs. All of them looked stronger than any human. You may carry only standard equipment, the commander continued. Basic survival gear, food for 3 days, and simple climbing tools. No advanced technology, no weapons beyond basic knives. If you fail, activate your emergency beacon. A rescue ship will collect you, but you will fail the academy. The cargo bay doors opened. Cold air rushed in like a living thing. Tae-ho felt it bite at his exposed skin. The temperature was already far below freezing, and they had not even left the ship yet. The absolute barrier has stood for 500 years, Commander Velthar said. In all that time, no cadet has ever reached the top. Most cannot climb even 50 meters. The ice is too hard, too smooth, too cold. But the test is not really about the wall. It is about knowing when to quit. Tae-ho picked up his pack. It felt heavy, but not too heavy. Inside were basic tools, emergency rations, a small tent, and climbing gear that looked simple compared to what he had seen on Earth. The other humans looked nervous. Boram, his roommate from Luna Colony, gave him a weak smile. Good luck, Tae-ho. Try not to die out there. You too, Tae-ho replied. He meant it. The academy was hard enough without losing friends. The cadets began filing out of the ship in groups of 4. Tae-ho found himself grouped with Nari, another human from Earth, Zixtal, the 6-armed alien, and Vorth, who looked like a bear made of stone. Vorth came from a world with 3 times Earth's gravity. His muscles were huge, and his skin was thick enough to stop bullets. They stepped onto the ice, and Tae-ho immediately understood why this place was called a deathworld. The wind cut through his jacket like knives. The ground was so slippery that walking was dangerous. The air was so cold that each breath felt like swallowing ice. Humans wear too many clothes, Vorth said. His voice was deep and slow. Weak skin needs protection. Zixtal laughed, a sound like metal scraping metal. My homeworld is colder than this. Easy test. Nari looked at Tae-ho. Her lips were already turning blue. Maybe we should have stayed in engineering school. But Taeho was studying the landscape. The ice was not all the same. Some parts were clear, some were white, some had a blue tint. The wind patterns created different shapes in the snow. His grandfather had taught him to read ice, to understand how water freezes and moves. "Come," Vorth said. "We find shelter before dark. Then we plan route to barrier." They walked for 2 hours. The aliens moved easily across the ice. Vorth's heavy feet gripped the ground naturally. Zixtal used his 6 arms to balance perfectly, never slipping. The humans struggled. Every step was careful, every movement slow. But Taeho noticed something. The aliens were not paying attention to their surroundings. They walked in straight lines, trusting their natural abilities. They did not watch the sky for weather changes. They did not test the ice before stepping on it. When they stopped to make camp, Vorth and Zixtal began arguing about the best place to sleep. Vorth wanted to find a cave. Zixtal wanted to build a shelter from ice blocks. While they argued, Taeho and Nari started gathering materials. "What are you doing?" Zixtal asked. "Building a shelter," Taeho said. He was cutting blocks of snow, testing each one for density and strength. "That is not how you build shelter," Vorth said. "You need strong walls, heavy blocks." "Heavy blocks. Conduct cold?" Taeho replied. "Light snow traps, warm air?" The aliens watched as the humans built a small dome from carefully selected snow blocks. It looked fragile compared to what Vorth could build with his strength, or what Zixtal could create with his 6 arms. But when they crawled inside, it was warm. "How?" Zixtal asked. "Air," Nari explained. "Trapped air keeps heat in. On Earth, we call it an igloo." That night, while the aliens slept comfortably in their natural cold resistance, Taeho lay awake, thinking. He had seen something in the way his teammates approached problems. They relied on what their bodies could do naturally. Vorth was strong, so he tried to solve problems with strength. Zixtal was naturally balanced, so he never worried about falling. But humans were different. Humans were weak and slow and had no natural protection against cold. So humans had learned to think their way around problems. They made tools. They built shelters. They studied their environment and adapted to it. On the second day, they reached the first checkpoint. Other groups were already there, and some cadets had already given up. Emergency beacons blinked red in the distance as rescue ships came to collect the failures. 43 cadets quit already, Nari said, reading the checkpoint display. "Smart," Vorth said. "Better to quit early than die later." But Taeho was looking ahead toward the absolute barrier. It was still far away, but he could see it on the horizon. A wall of white that seemed to touch the sky. It looked impossible to climb. It looked like a mountain made of glass. "No one has ever climbed it," Zixtal said, following his gaze. "The ice is too hard, too smooth, and if you fall from that height—" "Then we better not fall," Taeho said. The aliens laughed, but not in a mean way. They thought he was making a joke. But Taeho was not joking. He was planning. His grandfather had always said that ice was just water that forgot how to move. And if water could move once, it could move again. The question was, how to make it move when you needed it to.